Exposure, graded exposure for chronic pain and symptoms, and how it can help you heal. So, let's get into it. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. I just went for a run with Darla, my new dog. You know, when we got a dog, we got one of the most high energy dogs out there. She's a German Shepherd. And so I've been going on a lot more runs, but I thought it was a good time to record this video and discuss graded exposure. Now, if you're new to this channel, I talk about graded exposure in the form of somatic tracking a lot. So lots of videos that you can check out around this. But we need to use graded exposure to help us heal from neuroplastic pain and mind-body concerns. And so when we talk about graded exposure, this is something that I used a lot of when I was recovering. And even when I was out for my run, every now and then, I'm still kind of in awe that I'm able to run. Because with my personal journey, I was barely able to walk around the house, let alone go for a walk in general. And running was completely out of the question, because every time I would go for a walk for more than 5 minutes, my back and hips would just be in extreme, extraordinary pain. And so when I was healing, I needed to face that fear. And so when we talk about graded exposure, what we're discussing is this gradual exposure to something that we fear. And we use this in therapy all over the place, especially with anxiety disorders, but also sometimes with trauma. And what we do is we get this exposure to something that we fear, and the brain starts to learn, oh, I'm actually safe. I'm actually okay. But it needs to be gradual. And with neuroplastic pain, mind-body concerns, as Alan Gordon talks about, fear is a big contributor to neuroplastic pain and symptoms. One of the number one contributors. Now, fear can come in a lot of different forms, but fear of moving our body keeps us immobilized. And for a lot of us, we go into this dorsal vagal shutdown state, as I know I was in, when I was barely able to move my body. And so I needed to face that fear. Now, before you all go out and watch this video and then start doing exposure, it can be really helpful to work with a practitioner. For myself, I work with a lot of great physiotherapists, osteopaths, chiropractors that are informed about a mind-body approach, and we work together to help people get the right plan. Because gradual exposure, graded exposure is really useful, but if we do it in the wrong way, it can backfire and it can have a setback. But for myself, when I was recovering, I did this with walking at first. That was the first thing. I needed to start to be able to move my body and get out into the world. And at first, I just did it for like 2 minutes. That was it. I would basically walk a little bit down my street and then come back. And over time, I did this consistently, a couple times a day. And I started to be able to walk longer and longer. And eventually, I was able to start running. Now, running came a little bit later because I had a lot of fear around running and believing that it was damaging my body. So I needed to work through that. But by doing that, I was able to start to move my body again in any way that I wanted. And when I was on this run just recently, right before this video, I was in awe about the fact that I was able to move my body. Sometimes even when I'm lifting my kids, I have this moment of remembering many years ago when I was barely able to move my arms. And so graded exposure is a really effective technique for this. Now, when we're talking about graded exposure with neuroplastic pain, we're breaking conditioned responses. And basically with the conditioned response, what's happened is it's not the movement or position that's triggering the pain or symptom. It's just the fact that your brain has learned that that position or movement is dangerous. And when this happens and we start to get more and more conditioned responses, our life shrinks. And so to heal, we need to start approaching. Really, in a mind-body approach, we need to approach everything over time. Physical movements, positions, emotions, autonomic state, and our life in general. And so with graded exposure, that's what we're doing. We're starting to gradually expose ourselves to what we fear. Now, I'll link the conditioned response video that I have to the top here, so you can go and check that out. But I want to talk about a few points where people get caught up in graded exposure. So 3 points. Number one, the titration is wrong. So people are either doing the titration, and what I mean by that, gradually exposing themselves to a movement too slowly or too quickly. And when we do it too slowly, it can really drag exposure on. And when we do it too quickly, when the pain's neuroplastic, we're not going to damage our body, but it's going to overwhelm our nervous system. It's going to overwhelm it, and then we're going to get a blast of pain or symptoms taking place. And so we got to get the titration right. And I always tell people, we're not going slow because the body's damaged. We're going slow so that our nervous system feels safe. And so especially when you're doing graded exposure, it's not just doing the movement. We need to be aware of our autonomic state, are we starting to enter a fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown state? Or are there difficult emotions building up? Because that's a sign that you might be going too quickly. And then it can backfire, causing a setback. Now, when we do graded exposure, there's going to be setbacks no matter what. That comes with the territory. I've never seen someone make it through it without having a setback or two. So that's going to happen. But titration is the first point to be aware of. Now, the second point I want to cover that I see people get caught up on when they're starting to use graded exposure is they take it way too serious. And I get it. When we haven't been able to move our body, we feel like there's a lot on the line. And I remember being there. I felt like there was a lot on the line. The stakes were really high, but taking it too serious, putting all this pressure on it, trying to set a timeline for how this is going to go is going to cause your brain and nervous system to feel more in danger. So don't do that. When I was doing it, when I would go for my walk, I would put on like the happiest music, the most playful songs I could think of. I had a real good playlist going on. And that was really useful for me. It helped create safety in my nervous system, and it took the pressure off. And the second thing I did is I did not set a timeline. I didn't care how long it took. Could have took me 2 years longer. I still was going to do it. And so I didn't set a timeline, so there was no pressure. And so by doing that, we could create a pleasant state in our nervous system while we're doing work that is naturally scary. So don't take it too serious. Take the pressure off. Go slow. Be curious. And definitely don't set a timeline. So that's point number 2. Point number 3, where I see people struggle with graded exposure, is they still believe their body's damaged. And this is where we can get caught up. And lots of people have used graded exposure, for example, with physical practitioners, but it hasn't gone well because people have so much fear that the movement or position is actually damaging them. Now, you're watching this video. I don't know your case. I know I'm going to get lots of comments around this. I can't answer questions around that because I don't know your full case. But when the pain or symptom is neuroplastic, we're not actually damaging ourselves by doing graded exposure. We're overcoming the fear. We're overcoming the defense state of fight, flight, freeze, or shutdown that we've had to the pain for a long period of time. And so when we still believe our body's damaged, it can actually start to backfire the graded exposure because the fear just stays so high. And so if that's the case, sometimes we need to go back to basics, gather the evidence. I have an intro to neuroplastic pain on my channel. It's at the very top. I go through the criteria for neuroplastic pain, our mind-body concerns. And we need to start there. We need to start believing that our pain and symptoms are a brain and nervous system issue and that our body's actually safe. And when I came to understand that, and I didn't fully believe it, but I came to understand that this was likely what was taking place, the graded exposure work had a really different effect. So I have something caught in my throat. I have that after the run, dry throat going on. So this was my brief video on graded exposure and how it can be incorporated into a mind-body approach. Again, we're not going to heal by avoiding. We're going to heal by approaching. And so beginning to do some of this work can really be helpful. And over time, what happens is you just slowly increase the titration more and more. That's how I got to a place where I can run. That's where I got to a place where I can go and lift weights or spin my children around in the air. And I want that for everyone watching this channel. I want to give a message of hope here that this can be really beneficial work and a piece of our mind-body journey. So please put your questions or comments down below, hit the like button, and subscribe to my channel. And I will talk to you all next week. Happy healing.